All right. Good morning, afternoon, wherever you're at, and welcome to this workshop on building detections in AWS. My name is Ryan Nicholson. I'm the course author of both SEC 488 and co-author of SEC 541 here with SANS. This workshop really ties into a lot of the material we discuss in the latter course, the SEC 541 Cloud Security Attacker Techniques, Monitoring, and Threat Detection course. And before we get started, as Laura mentioned a couple of minutes ago, unless you just joined and didn't hear that announcement, any communication that you need to answer questions, ask questions, or say, hey, I need some help, I'm having some technical issues, will all be done via Slack. We also have a Q&A built into Zoom that we can hold off until the end if you have any like overarching questions on anything we've talked about today. We'll also make sure to hit those as well in Zoom. So the instructions are on the screen here. They've been up for the last few minutes now. So I'll just quickly mention the URL. So it's sansurl.com/sans-workshop. It's also in the Zoom chat. Laura posted it out there as well. So that's what we're going to be using Slack for during this workshop. If it's not your first workshop, you're well aware of the Slack workspace. Actually, I have a Q&A right in front of my face right now. I'll answer it now because I'm sure this person is not alone. My organization has banned Slack. It's unfortunate. Is there an alternative way that we can communicate? Laura is going to answer, well, having me answer that. You can use the Q&A. You can use the Zoom chat. Just realize it will not take priority because I have Slack open to this side. So I'll be glancing at this occasionally, and I'll be staring at my slides in front of me. But I will get to you, I promise. Or my support, which is a fellow instructor for SEC 541, Alex Braulick, will also be reaching out to you if you run into any issues. So if you see this Alex fellow helping you out, he's here to help you out. All right. So that's the Slack, but let's start digging in. I don't have a lot to say. You may think, thank goodness, you want to get your hands dirty. This is a workshop after all. So there's going to be a little bit of lead-in material, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. I'll try to keep it very, very brief because there are 6 exercises you're going to be performing during this workshop. Right? I'll actually get to the next slide here and you can see them all at a glance. Some of these are going to move more quickly than others. And to be honest, one's just a cleanup exercise so you don't get that surprise bill at the end of the month from AWS. Now, with that said, because we get this question all the time, anytime you're bringing your own AWS account, which we're expecting you to do for this workshop, and I'll get to that in just a second, there is going to be some cost. Now, what level of cost? Is it pennies? Is it dollars? Is it tens or hundreds of dollars? It should be pennies. When I built this workshop, I was deploying, tearing down over and over and over again for weeks. And I think my cloud bill for this was 12 US cents, right? You heard that correctly. It's very, very inexpensive. We're working with a lot of serverless technology, and it's very minimal what we're doing in this environment. They tend to be pretty cheap services. And unless you go off the beaten path very far, I wouldn't expect much of a bill at all. You likely will not feel this, but just want to lay that disclaimer out there. There will be a very, very marginal cost to this workshop. But the other 5 exercises are right in line with building some detections. I do got to get another disclaimer out of the way here. In this workshop, that AWS account that I'd mentioned that you're coming to the workshop with, hopefully, or you're spinning one up right now as I'm talking, you will be attacking it. So we do not recommend, for a variety of reasons, not to use your company's production AWS account or even your personal AWS account that you care about. The way we've designed these exercises is that this is a fresh AWS account. So some of the commands may not return some of the results that we expect if you have other resources in your AWS account. And even if they do, again, you're attacking this account. You may be setting off some alerts or just making the security team very concerned about what's going on in this enterprise AWS account, if that's what you happen to be using. So got to steal a quote from Brandon Evans, another SANS instructor. I was listening to a talk of his, and he mentioned these RGEs. I'm like, tell me more. It's short for resume generating events. So please, again, just don't do anything that may have you looking for a job next week, right? So should be using a set aside, fresh AWS account or a sandbox account that nobody cares about for this workshop. There is a note that I found this out the hard way. during the first run of this workshop. We did a run in Orlando, the very first run of this particular workshop. And we found that some folks that showed up and were spinning up the AWS account, like at this time, while I'm talking in the intro, when they got to the first few exercises, they couldn't do everything. Like Cloud Shell, we're going to be using that in our web browser to be doing our command line interactions. There's going to be some GUI interactions as well, some graphical user interface interactions using your management console. But from command line, since we don't want to require you to bring a VM or VMware to these workshops and keep it as easy as possible on the students, found out that Cloud Shell wasn't available right out of the gate for a couple of students, to be honest. So if that's the case for you, unfortunately, you may not be able to do the challenges right when we're setting aside the time to do them. But I'll also mention this, this isn't over when the time is up. I'm leaving the workbook that I'll mention in a little while up and running for the foreseeable future, right? And when I say that, it's at least months, right? So you can always revisit this if you're having account issues or, oh no, I'm in my production account, I shouldn't be using that. Maybe I'll do these later. The workbook will be available for the next several months for sure. In fact, the first workshop I did probably 4 or 5 months ago is still up and running, and I have no intention of tearing that down either. So it should be there is what I'm getting at. So what are we ultimately doing here? I gave a talk, which was very similarly named a few months ago, building cloud detections in AWS, and there was ... by hacking. I'll admit, it was a very clickbait title. It drew a pretty large crowd, so it did its job. But it's exactly that, right? Sometimes when you create detections, whether it's cloud or non-cloud, you have to see real world interactions, right? You may have to attack things to see what those breadcrumbs would look like if you were attacked in the real world. So if a real life attacker attacked this resource and we've enabled the proper logging, that's a huge part of this, what does that look like? How can I build a detection based upon that output, that log data, right? So this is the life cycle. Now, I admit this life cycle could go down very deep rabbit holes. So it's a very general life cycle, which I spoke of in that talk, to start to generate some of those detections, right? So very first, at the very top here, research the attack technique. You'll see that in exercise 2, and we're looking for a very particular attack. In fact, the next slide will mention that attack that we're going to perform during this workshop. Next, of course, once we know what the attacker could be leveraging against us, how they could be coming at us, we need to make sure we have the proper audit data to be able to detect it, right? If we're missing data, we're completely blind to the attack. There's no way you can build a detection, right? So we got to set up the proper logging. Again, something we're doing in the workshop for sure. Then ourselves perform an attack against realistic assets that mimic production resources. Again, not the production resources unless you have absolute blessing from major players in your organization. Maybe you're part of a pen test team and part of your day job is to attack stuff, right? Internally, then you'll have those permissions. But for the general cybersecurity practitioner, probably not the case. So when I mean realistic assets, I mean fake assets in a safe and secure environment, that sandbox AWS account that you can perform attacks against so that you can see what that log data would look like when that real world adversary is performing that work. And of course, review the data. And then what we're going to get to later in the workshop is that's great, right? It's great that we can identify an attacker, perform threat hunts and things of that nature, but it's very manual. Let's see if we can use some services, some cloud native services, in fact, to be able to automate some of this detection, do the work for us, regularly analyze our data, and let us know when you see that detection that we would otherwise manually have performed ourselves, right? So that's the life cycle we're going to work through over the next 2 hours. So what are we looking at though? Now, we don't have time to have you walk away with dozens of detections and dozens of ways to find an attacker with each of those attack techniques. We have time to discuss exactly one. And to be honest, if you can build a detection from scratch in a sandbox environment and move that over to your production environment in less than 2 hours, good on you, right? This is a process. It takes some time, some fine tuning, some trial and error to get it right. And you may not even have it 100% right. I will admit, there will be some of you will build this automation. It may not work for you for a couple of reasons. One, you have an edge case that I wasn't accounting on, and no other participant has that edge case that we found thus far. Or two, some of the services we're using are what vendors call best effort. logging being one of them in some cases, where CloudTrail data is going to be one of the resources that we're leveraging to identify the attack being performed in our account. Well, CloudTrail, when it's reporting its data to another service we'll look at shortly, Event Bridge, getting my Azure and AWS terminology mixed up there, but Event Bridge, it says it delivers that data as best effort. You may not get everything all the time. It may lose data. So that could be another reason why your detection just isn't working. So again, it's very much trial and error when you're building these techniques over the long haul, okay? So the technique in question, I've been talking around it for a while now, is we're going to be extracting data from cloud storage. Happens all the time. Something we discuss in almost every scenario in Sec 541, because we kick off each day talking about a real world attack, which happened to a cloud customer. Almost all of them involve theft of data, or they very well could have, right? The attacker was positioned perfectly to be able to extract data if that was their intent. So we're going to focus on this particular technique. So an early way to catch an attacker before they make off with that loot is a little bit of deception. We're going to be leveraging some deception here by creating a honey file. Honey files really quickly are that it's a heavily monitored file that's fake, that looks enticing. It may draw the attention of an attacker, like a passwords.txt file sitting out in cloud storage. If an attacker were to perform a discovery attack against us, where they're trying to see what kind of visibility they have, what kind of resources they can access, and they stumble upon a passwords.txt, highly likely they'll interact with that file, let alone download that file to see what it contains. So if we're detecting the heck out of that file, maybe we identify the attacker before they find the real sensitive data, the real crown jewels of the organization. So that's how we're going to spot them. That's what we're going to base our detection off of. Activity based upon access of a file. All right, so we're going to deploy that honey file in this workshop pretty soon. We're going to make sure we have proper logging. That's going to come up in exercise 2. Exercise 3, we're going to emulate the attack, which is going to be very straightforward. Perform discovery, try to locate the file of interest, and then download the file once we find it. Pretty straightforward attack. Now, there's an assumption here that the attacker's in the environment. How a lot of these cloud-based attacks start, or at least very early on in these attacks, are uncovering of cloud credentials in some way, right? Once I have your AWS credentials, the first step I'm likely going to do as a pen tester or as an attacker would be to see what I have access to, perform discovery. Do I have access to storage? Can I manipulate your virtual machines? Can I create a backdoor user for myself? Things like that. And if so, perform that action, like downloading of this file. So that's what you're going to emulate in exercise 3. Exercise 4 is where you perform the detection piece, the manual detection, that is, looking across your wealth of data, spotting your activity where you located and accessed that file. And then exercise 5 is where we perform the automation. We're going to build automation by using a variety of tools in AWS, all cloud native. We're going to, of course, use CloudTrail, Event Bridge, which will pass CloudTrail data to a Lambda function if it matches our criteria. And that Lambda function is really what's doing the automation. It's analyzing that API call, deeming that it is, in fact, someone accessing our very sensitive file, and generating an alert for us in the 4th service, Security Hub. I know that's a lot of services I was throwing at you very quickly, but it'll be very clear when you start uncovering the various moving parts of this workshop very, very shortly. All right. So this first exercise is a deployment exercise. This gets the groundwork deployed into your AWS account so that you can perform turning on logging, performing the attack, performing the detection yourself, and then building the automation. So what's going on? What's going to be in your account in a matter of moments? Well, once you access AWS Cloud Shell, you're going to be pulling down some infrastructure as code from one of my GitHub repositories, simply called Building Detections AWS. That has the infrastructure as code, which is in this case CloudFormation, to quickly and effortlessly deploy some things. What are those things? It's going to deploy for you a Lambda function, which we're simply going to call honey file detection. It's going to turn on the Security Hub service. There is a note in this exercise. If your account in North Virginia already has Security Hub enabled, CloudFormation will break. Well, it won't break, it just won't perform the work. So there is some steps in there to temporarily turn that off for the workshop so that your CloudFormation template actually deploys properly. All right. And then the other thing is, of course, the honey file. Well, the honey file's got to go somewhere. So it's going to create an S3 bucket called data backup, which is a very realistic sounding bucket, right? Something an attacker may be looking at, because what's in backups? Maybe some sensitive data. And we have one called passwordbackup.txt. That's the honey file that's going to be deployed. So without any further delay, I promise it's the most I'm going to talk in this workshop, although between exercises, I will have a few moments to talk about, what the next phase of your exercise is going to be. Let's take the next 15 minutes and go to the URL that's on the screen right here. We'll post this in Slack as well, and I'll post it in the Zoom chat in a moment. This is a SANS workbook. If you've taken a SANS course over the last probably year and a half, 2 years, this should look very familiar to you. It may have been in a VM for you, but this one's hosted online. It's at building-detections-aws.sanscloudwars.com. I'll show you what that looks like here. When you arrive, and I'll bring it back up, I promise. When you arrive at this page, you don't see a whole lot right off the bat. It just talks about, here's our process that we're going to be working through. Here's the exercises, but where are the exercises? You can get to them a couple ways. We're working on exercise 1 now. You can click on the exercise 1 link at the bottom of this first page, or you can go up to exercises. If you click on that tab at the very top, it'll bring you right to exercise 1, where we're deploying the workshop resources. So very straightforward. However, you'll notice that if you look through the challenges, the solutions are hidden from you. This is in case there's some folks in the workshop that are like, I got this. I've been doing this work for years. I'm a rock star. I need no help whatsoever. If you tell me launch AWS Cloud Shell, I know how to do that. In fact, I bet a lot of you can. So just do it, right? But if you get stuck, or if you're brand new to this, like, what the heck is Cloud Shell? I know what it is, but I've never used it before. How do I access it? There's solutions in each challenge. You just simply click on the green box and it will expand for you. And these solution steps are, if you stick to them 100%, knock on wood, you will be successful with that challenge, right? Very screenshot heavy where it's needed. There's also some opportunity to copy and paste. If I skip down to challenge 2, you'll notice there's a variety of commands you'll be running. You could type all these out, totally fine, by the way. There's going to be some that you may want to copy and paste. You'll know it when you see them. But there's also a copy paste button off to the right. That will copy everything that's in this box, and you just paste it where you need to. In this case, it'll be in your Cloud Shell session, and the commands will run automatically for you. So if you want to, have the muscle memory, type everything out yourself, totally fine. I think we have enough time for that during these exercises. If not, if you're like me, find yourself typoing a lot or in a bit of a time crunch, copy and paste can save you from typos and catching up if you need to. All right, so it's all there for you. You can go about this however you choose. But right now we're deploying stuff in your AWS account. So I'm going to set a timer for 15 minutes. That should be enough time. If you have any problems, of course, we have Slack. We have myself and Alex who can help you out. So enjoy the first exercise of the workshop. We'll regroup when the timer's over. So don't move on to exercise 2 unless you want to. I'll talk about the next exercise for a couple minutes and then get into that exercise. And we'll repeat that pattern throughout the workshop. So enjoy. And you don't want to just sit and listen to me talk, continue working. That's totally fine. This exercise is pretty short and to the point though. So what you did, of course, was ran some infrastructure as code, fancy way of saying automating a cloud deployment using AWS's offering CloudFormation, right? Simply, I believe mine was written in YAML. You can write in YAML or JSON instructions to say, here, AWS, build this thing for me, and it makes it happen. Now, if you've attended Sec 540 before, please don't review that code. It's probably deploying things in not the most secure way possible. So that's probably another reason why, the third reason why you don't want to deploy this into production. You may have some vulnerability assessment tools going absolutely crazy with a couple of these services that were deployed, only because there can be some further lockdown measures we should probably be taking, which actually we're going to get in front of a few of those in the next exercise, like monitoring. Right, you deployed that S3 bucket, or the code did for you, with that fictitious sensitive file. But let's even pretend it's not fictitious. It's real deal, critical, sensitive data for your organization. Of course, it'd be a good idea to log accesses to that storage location, the individual files, and so on. So that's going to help build our detection, of course, because right now If we had an adversary or we performed the attack ourselves and we stole that data, we're almost completely blind to it, because cloud native logging is not the best. Something we cover pretty heavily in actually both my courses, 488 and 541. More or less saying there's a lot more work the customer has to do to regain visibility. Like the discovery attack you're going to perform in exercise 3, you'll see that hopefully in the CloudTrail service, which is on by default. But some of the more granular data, like accesses to files within S3 buckets, that's not on by default. That's what we're going to be changing in this next exercise. We're going to turn on what they call data events in CloudTrail and write that log data to longer term storage. Another, I don't want to call it downside, but another drawback or thing to be aware of, let's just call it that, with CloudTrail is that yes, it does record some API calls or interactions with your cloud account via web calls, more or less. It's not capturing everything, and the data is only there for 90 days. So what we're doing, it's actually twofold in this exercise. We're gaining the visibility we need to say, yes, that person downloaded that file, but also we're tackling that drawback of only keeping the data for 90 days. Keep it somewhere safe for longer term safekeeping, because I'm sure a lot of you are in heavily regulated environments where even down to the log data, you have to keep for a year or 2 years or 5 years, what have you. CloudTrail's not doing that by default. So solving two problems here with this next exercise, API event logging, which again simply means interactions with your cloud account over web, whether that's listing services or making changes to your cloud resources, or even down to the level of downloading files. We want to turn on that logging. And that's what you're doing right now for the next 15 minutes. So if you're not familiar with the workbooks, to get to the next exercise, on the left, you'll see the exercise 2. Click on that. And now you'll notice that the color scheme changed a little bit. Something fun I like to have in my workbooks is to make it very clear, are you doing an attacker related thing or are you doing a defender related thing? So, and I apologize if you can't see the differences in these colors. I know not everyone has the same ability to see colors that I do, but we'll see that for most of us, I think, we'll see that this changes blue along the top heading there. All right, doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. It's just to indicate that you are now being the defender. You're going to be turning on some additional logging, some API event logging for the next 15 minutes. You're also going to research the attack, the thing we're trying to detect ultimately, that attack technique where attackers are stealing things from your cloud environment, right? So enjoy exercise 2. I'll set a timer once again for 15 more minutes. Should be plenty of time, but if not, let us know in Slack if things are being weird for you, and we'll be there to assist if my timer works. There we go. All right, enjoy. All right, that was 15 minutes for the exercise. So again, if you're still working or you're working ahead, you can feel free to ignore me, but I do want to talk about the next exercise and more or less why you turned on the logging that you turned on in the last exercise. So otherwise, you'd be pretty blind to what you're about to do. So we're going to assume during this attack that you're performing is that you acquired a cloud credential. Again, it's very often with cloud-related breaches that the attacker's initial entry point into that cloud account was due to a credential that was either discovered or guessed, right? Ranging anywhere from a developer accidentally uploads credentials to their source code repository, to phishing users, getting them to divulge their cloud credentials, to just simply running some brute force tools, or, well, can't say brute force tools over web. It's not 100% correct. It's a dictionary attack or a password spray attack, typically targeting cloud accounts, right? Tools like MSOL spray, MSOL, Microsoft Online spray against Azure accounts, or one of the ones that I talked about in my webcast earlier, which will launch a password spray against AWS accounts, could be one of many ways, more or less, to get access to credentials and then further their exploits inside the cloud account. So assuming you have credentials, which you do, I mean, you're in your account now, you're going to mimic that attacker, that fox in the hen house, as it's called. So you're going to perform really two techniques here, attack techniques. First is going to be a discovery attack. You're trying to see what you have access to, right? So one of the commands performed very often with discovery attacks in AWS, one of the API calls, I should say, is list buckets, right? As the name suggests, show me all the S3 buckets that my credential has access to, right? Now, whether or not I can download data from it is another story, but what's out there? What's out there that I could possibly access? You'll find something of interest, actually 2 buckets, one you created in the last lab and one that was created for you in the first exercise, data backup and cloud logs. Of course, the attacker, not to say they wouldn't want to look at the cloud logs, because maybe they can poison the logs, delete the logs, cover their tracks, right? They may be more drawn to the data backup because there could be other sensitive data. I mean, they've already uncovered cloud credentials, but maybe there's root account credentials or credentials to some very critical application they're trying to access in the environment, or whatever the case may be. So you're going to be drawn to that S3 bucket, and you're going to find a file in that bucket that's very interesting to you, password backup.txt. That's the honey file. You're going to download that honey file, and in doing these actions, now if you're working ahead, I'm going to caution you, if you move straight into exercise 4, there's a bit of a delay for those log files to be delivered, to be created and delivered to where you're going to access them in exercise 4. So I recommend taking a break after the next exercise, which is only going to be about 10 minutes long, and I'm going to talk again. By that time, you'll have access to that log data. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes, I should say, from when you perform the action to when the log data is available for you to analyze, right? So that's what you're doing in this next exercise, exercise 3, attacking the cloud account. Let's see, audio issues. Looks like it's good for everyone, mostly. All right. If I cut in and out, or if it's just being weird for many people, definitely let me know. I'll do some adjustments during the exercises if I need to, but looks like it may be a standalone. Oh, there we go. Switched audio. Okay, so it was an end user thing. Happens to me all the time. All right, so with that out of the way, let's get into exercise 3 now, not to delay you any further. I'm gonna set the timer for 10 minutes. This one's really short and to the point. It's all done in your Cloud Shell session. You'll see how quick and easy attackers can tear through these environments if they know what they're doing. So take the next 10 minutes, locate that S3 bucket of interest, find the file, download the file. Simple as that. All right, so that's our 10 minutes for this exercise. You saw that one was really short and sweet. In fact, I see at least one of you, and I'm sure you're not alone, was working ahead a little bit and come to a problem, right? Found a problem in challenge 3 of the next lab, where you were looking at the log data, trying to find evidence of the attack that you had just performed. And I did warn against this. I didn't say exactly where you'd find it, but that's exactly where you'd find it. I warned that you may not get the log data delivered to you by the time you're ready to analyze it. If you've been going through exercise after exercise after exercise, that may be the case. In fact, when I test these out, I just tested it before the workshop started to make sure it all worked. I ran against the same problem, and then remembering, oh, that's right. Whenever you turn on data events in CloudTrail, it takes upwards of 10 minutes for that data to be delivered, or to be, seen in CloudTrail, visible in CloudTrail, and then an additional 5 minutes or so for it to be delivered to S3, which is where you're extracting that data. So we're talking 10 to 15 minutes on average for that data to be downloadable and then able to be parsed like you do in the next challenge. So with that said, I'm going to tap dance a little bit. Not really. There's just a little more to talk about here before you get into exercise 4 to allow some time for that data to be there when you go to extract it. So up to this point, just to recap what we've done thus far, challenge 1 or exercise 1, you deployed a bunch of stuff. Well, not a ton, but a few things that's supporting infrastructure for the workshop. In exercise 2, you turned on the right log data, right? You did some investigation of an attack that you want to capture, and you'll see another one too, as well as turning on the right logging, those data events that I was just talking about. Now, in exercise 3, of course, you perform the attack, just to make sure that you can perform what an attacker would perform to see what that log trail would look like. Now, we're going to do that investigation. So there's a couple approaches. We're going to do the harder one, just to kind of reinforce the point that there's better ways of doing this. But in a pinch, this is what you can do. The way these logs are being delivered into S3 are going to be buried pretty deeply into that S3 bucket, right? When you, in exercise 2, you said, deliver my log data here. It's going to be in that cloud logs dash your account number S3 bucket at the location of, or prefixes, as one of us has found out, when you see that PRE in your output, that is a fancy way of saying folder. there's an AWS logs folder, followed by your account number, followed by CloudTrail, followed by the region, followed by the year, month, date, and then some crazy long file name .gz. And it's going to be, there's going to be several of those files by the time you get to it. So how do you know what file contains the data you're looking at? Other than looking at timestamps and making an educated guess, you don't. So you probably, if you know what happened on this day at least, download all of those gzip compressed files, because you can't view them in your AWS portal, unfortunately. So you have to download them somewhere, extract them all, and then dig through the JSON data, because it's written in JavaScript object notation, or JSON, or JSON as some people like to call it, right? So it's quite the manual process, but what we're going to do, we're going to download all the data, extract it, and then slice and dice that data, or as we call it at SANS, command line kung fu, right? To figure out what you were doing as the attacker. Now, if you come up empty, or you've already done this, like I didn't have any non-management events when I ran that management events equals false, it came back blank. It's probably that the data wasn't there yet, those data events, okay? So what you'll have to do, I mentioned this in Slack, but if you're not alone, you'll have to go back in exercise 4 to challenge 2, step 2, to re-download the new data as well, the old and the new data, and then go back to where you left off, more or less, right? And hopefully by this time, you will have seen those data events. But as I mentioned, some of these services are best effort. I had to run the attack twice during one of my testing of this, just for my data to show up at all. So worst case scenario, and you'll be behind a little bit, you have to rerun exercise 3, which only took a matter of minutes, wait 15 minutes, and download your data a third time. And hopefully by then, the attack will show up. Okay, that's worst case scenario. I don't expect too many folks to have to go that route. That's the manual approach. There's cloud native approaches to this as well. Now, I just mentioned that in S3, you can't just view the data in your web browser. Unfortunately, it won't automatically extract it, and you can slice and dice the data. And even if you could view it in the browser, not the best place to review JSON data, to be quite honest. A lot of the command line tools that can really rip apart this data, you don't get in your web browser. But there are some companion services in AWS, which does make use of data in S3, being able to parse through that data. And that service is known as Athena. It does take a bit to set up, which we don't have time to do in the workshop. We're probably talking a half hour or more just to get that service working properly, so you can dig through that data. If you want more, of course, you can look at the vendor documentation, but something we do in Sec 541 is have that pre-set up for you, so you can see that side of the coin as well. Like, what can I do from my web browser 100% to dig through this data in AWS? Now, the third option, of course, I'm sure this is where a lot of your minds are going, like, just get this data to my SIM. That's what that tool is for, right? It can ingest a variety of data. It can enrich it. It can normalize the data. And I can just search through the data using my Splunk queries. Or if I'm shipping it off to even Microsoft Sentinel, I can write KQL queries or Custo query language queries to slice and dice this data. I get it. But if we want to stick with 100% cloud native and not add even more requirements to this workshop, that's the approach we're going to go. So we're going to use Cloud Shell, pull down this data, extract it, parse it, find your attack, right? Detect. So that's what exercise 4 is all about. Let's see here. Yeah, just use Athena. All right, so I didn't see anything else pop in. So let's move on to exercise 4, where you'll notice when you were in exercise 2, it went red on you, right? You're being evil attacker. I was evil attacker Ryan at that point. When you go to exercise 4, back to blue, back to being a defender, where you're detecting that attack. So hopefully I tap danced enough that by this time, your data should be there when you go through this exercise. If not, as I mentioned, just go back, wait a couple more minutes, go back to challenge 2, step 2, re-download hopefully the new data, and you can continue where you left off, and all should be well. But if that's not the case, and it's been several minutes, please reach out. You might have another underlying issue somewhere. 15 minutes on this lab. This one takes a little bit more time due to the lengthy commands you'll be running. But if you have any issues, please reach out. We're here to help. Otherwise, I will be quiet for the next 15 minutes or so. I'm not seeing a lot of chatter in Slack, so I'm assuming all is going well. Bryce did bring up a good, brought up what was a concern, but something worth mentioning. Something I've found with some AWS logging, especially when it comes to identity-related information, is that their logging structure may be a bit different depending on if you're using your root account or an IAM user, or if you're doing cross-account role assumption. it really depends on where your user name may be. So that one of the final commands may show a username of null, just because where you're looking for it in your sample command isn't exactly there, right? It doesn't exist. So not to worry though, in the next exercise, and I'll talk about it here in just a moment, that's all figured out in the Lambda function. The Lambda function should be able to say more or less, oh, this is a root user, I know to go here for the username, or it's an IAM user, I know to go here, and so on, right? Is representation of the root as null tied its identity? No, that's just that exact query isn't working for your scenario. That's all that means. It's just where that username field is expected to be in the query is not where it is in the log file. You'd have to tune that log or that query to look in the right location. That's all, but not important, because again, our Lambda function is going to automate all this for us and extract the username, hopefully, knock on wood. Unless, again, there's another weird scenario with your account that's different from any of our testing accounts or any other participants in the workshop. And we'll add a fourth way to find your username if that's the case. But for now, knock on wood, it's all working properly. So let me pull over the next single slide here to talk through. Before we get to really the last exercise, there's one more at the very end, which takes just a matter of minutes to clean everything up from the workshop. As long as you've stuck to the program here, everything should tear down just fine. But before we get to that, let's do probably the most important, or the funnest, I would say, exercise of the whole thing, and where we're automating that detection. That last exercise was very manually involved. Yes, we did give you the commands, but to build those yourselves from the ground up takes some time, right? That last exercise, most of that was figuring out the right queries, the right JQ queries to extract exactly what we needed. And as you saw, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Same with this exercise. This exercise may only take you 15 minutes or so, maybe 20 max. But a lot of work went into this, and I'm not guaranteeing it's perfect, but hopefully we'll do our thing. So what's it ultimately doing? What are we going to be setting up in this lab? We're going to be setting up what's called an event bridge rule. Event bridge, this service, its sole purpose in life is to take events from one cloud service and pass that event information that's matched to another cloud service, even to your SIM directly if you've configured it to do so. We're going to send data from CloudTrail, from our CloudTrail trail. There's data events that match our criteria. You'll see the criteria in the next lab. Pass that information to a Lambda function to do something about it. That's really the automation piece to this. Lambda is going to look at that information that was acquired by Event Bridge, say more or less, yes, this looks like someone accessing our honey token, our honey file, I should say, and a new critical finding will be created in the Security Hub service where an analyst will be able to review that data. This could easily be your SIM solution, your incident response platform, whatever. We're just using all built-in services, again, for this workshop. It could be really whatever you want, all right? And again, just mentioning in exercise 4, step 4, if you didn't get any output, could be because you moved too quickly or the data just wasn't there yet. Worst case scenario, you may need to go back, rerun exercise 3 in its entirety, and then go back through exercise 4, because maybe it just missed the event, or maybe your command ultimately failed and you didn't notice it or something like that. All right, could be the case. I don't know for sure. If you're running into that missing data issue, that could be how you solve that. So exercise 5, as I mentioned, is building the automation. So we should just have this, again, it stays blue here for being defenders. We're going to be creating this event bridge rule, right? Now, part of this lab, you're also going to be doing some attacking. I guess I should have colored this purple just to verify that your detection is working. You'll be going back and forth between defending and attacking. So you'll set up the automation, you'll rerun your attack. And just like before, where there might be a little bit of delay by the time you can view the alert in this case, there might be some delay here. So in challenge 4 of exercise 5, if you're not seeing that critical alert showing up, refresh your page after a minute or two. It should pop up if all went well. If all didn't go well, could have been a problem with the function. You could have an edge case. You may need to rerun your attack. Variety of issues may come up, but and knock on wood, it's pretty rare that you will see issues. This does work pretty smoothly most of the time, but please reach out if you're not seeing your finding after, I would say, 5 minutes of waiting around, and we'll try to get you squared away. I'll set 15 minutes on the timer. That tends to be enough time for this. And then I can go through my end since we're cutting it close to time, but this will be up, and this question's been asked a few times. This will be online for months, several months, probably 6 months or more. So if you are running low on time or you got to bail and come back later, the workbook will be there beyond our time together. So take the next 15 minutes and work through this final real exercise. I'll do my conclusion. You can go through the final teardown exercise. It only takes a couple minutes at the very end. So enjoy this piece, and we'll get back in a little bit. All right, so that's, like I said, really the last exercise that goes along with the actual building detections, because exercise 6 is tearing down all the things, which we'll get to in just a moment. It only takes a few minutes, but I do have some final thoughts, final slides here. And thank you, Laura, for posting that in Slack, because we had a number of questions asking, is this going to be recorded? Are the slides going to be available? What about the workbook? That's all answered, I think. There. So the work, I'll just read some cliff notes here. This was recorded. So in your SANS portal in about 48 hours, I've seen it even like the next day, no guarantees though, but within 48 hours, you'll see under your My Webcasts, this recording, so you can watch it after the fact. I've mentioned a few times in passing that this URL that you've been going to, the building detections, aws.sanscloudwars.com, that will be there for the foreseeable future. Anything I'm missing there? Oh, the presentation should show up as well. So those PowerPoints that I'm presenting from, you should see those there as well whenever they're posted within 48 hours or so, we'll say. All right, glad you all enjoyed it. Like I said, I do have a couple of things I want to mention here on these next few slides. Just, of course, the takeaways. Basically, what you've gone through was a miniaturized version of building a detection, right? There's a lot more we could have done. We could have enriched the data, like tell me more, give me more context in which this user accessed that file. How did they get in initially? What was the access key that they used? We could have just gone, this could have been a day-long exercise for sure. Get that data to my SIM, and you can go down a lot of different paths here. Just an example of the overall thought process though, when you approach building a detection. Research the attack, figure out what logging needs to be in place, perform the attack yourself, so you make sure you have the proper level of logging so you can identify the attack in the future, detect it, and then build some kind of automated detection if you can in your tool of choice, or build it very manually like we did in this, this workshop. Okay, that's the overall takeaway. So as I mentioned leading into this, I authored 2 courses for SANS. This is the second one that I started with, and this was not my course. I'm not going to take much credit for it. This is Sean McCullough's course. I'm just a co-author. I got brought in late to the game when we realized there's a lot of interest in being able to spot attackers in cloud accounts. Seems to be a huge gap in a lot of enterprises. So that's what the course is largely trying to solve. When you're hosting cloud workloads, how do you find adversaries amongst those cloud workloads in your account and so on? So there's a few runs of it coming up. There's more where this came from through the end of the year too. If the schedule doesn't suit you and you want to join the course, I'm actually teaching this next week in San Diego at Security West. Hope to see you there. Kind of a small taste of what we're going to be talking about next week. Alex, who's been helping with some of the lab issues you may or may not have had, he's teaching in Singapore the week after that. So if you're on that side of the world and you want to jump into the course, Alex is there to help you. And again, you can take this at any time. We have other live and live online runs from the comfort of your own home. And Sean teaches this run on demand. So you take that version of this course as well, if you so choose to do that. So plenty of opportunities to just dig in more deeply. And got to talk about the overall cloud security curriculum. Yes, this has grown now into a full-blown curriculum within SANS. Started as a single SANS cloud course, and just look at where we're at now. And depending on your journey through your career progression, if you're going into cloud, or you have a substantial amount of work that you perform in cloud from a security perspective, there's likely a course for you. There's likely several courses that may work just well for you as well. So this slide breaks down a few of those. You can even see there's a number, what are we up to, 7 certifications now through GIAC with our variety of offerings also. All right, so just some more information on that, where else you could go from here. There's going to be some future webcasts and workshops that I'm a part of. This next one that I'm the webcast is going to be this Thursday. If you've attended the AWS edition of this, it's very similar, except of course, we're going to be talking about some Azure capabilities to help identify and spot adversaries attacking your Azure account. So what we performed in this workshop, again, was based on a talk that I did previously, the Building Better Detections by Hacking AWS Edition. So as you can imagine, this is very similar, but Azure. And then, of course, that means there's going to be another workshop. Very much to some degree what you did in this workshop, but in Azure, but the detection is going to be a little bit different, and the process is going to be a little bit different as well. And that's going to be Thursday, June 11th, right? Same time, 11 to 12 Eastern time. Now, I can't take much credit for this one either. I mentioned Alex, who's been very helpful throughout this workshop. He's doing a lot of the building for this workshop, so I got to give him credit where credit is due. He's doing the hard part. I'm just going to be the one presenting it. I have a little bit of involvement with the creation of it, but it's really Alex's home run. Like, based upon what I've been seeing so far, if you enjoyed this workshop, you're absolutely going to love the Azure version. Alex put a lot of interesting things into the workshop. I don't want to spoil any of it though, of course. All right. So with that said, I know we got 6 minutes left, but I want to reserve some time for you to tear down your stuff if you only planned on being here for 2 hours. Any questions you may have on anything we've talked about, any of the courseware, anything at all. I'll be keeping my eyes on Slack. Did I get the date wrong? I did get the date wrong. It never fails. Last time I ran this workshop, I had a slide from an event that happened like the week before. I'm like, hey, join. Oh, wait, you can't. It's already over. So yeah, that date is incorrect. I'll fix the slide and send it to Laura. That way, when you download the slides, it is correct. But yeah, it is June 8th, Thursday, June 8th of this year. All right, sorry about that. Thanks for pointing that out to me there, Melinda. The link for registering the Azure workshop. Yep, we can provide that in Slack, or I'll ask Laura if she can to do that as well. All right, my guess, Gus, for your problem in the next lab is maybe you didn't name your EventBridge rule exactly honey file. If you did not, you're going to have to edit that script, unfortunately, or better yet, I would go to your EventBridge rule, rename it to exactly honey file, all one word, and then retry the teardown. That's probably the issue based on the error that I'm seeing there. All right. There we go. Thank you, Laura. I see the workshop registration link there, so that's good. Oh, I'm going to also put in Slack here. If you want to keep in touch, I freely make my contact information available. So there it is. You have my email address. Want to reach out for anything? LinkedIn, Discord. Sans has a Discord for the cloud curriculum. I encourage you to go there as well. We also have office hours, instructor office hours. Gets wild at times, talking about really anything cloud. Encourage you to attend that also. Thank you, Fawn. I enjoyed the workshop as well. I had a much easier time of it than you did, but it's definitely fun nonetheless. I knew that question was coming. I'm scanning through these comments, Devin. Will there be a GCP equivalent? Sean's not here, so I'm going to say Sean's going to write. I'm just joking. Myself and Sean talk about 541 quite a bit. Like, what's the next iteration going to look like? Right now, we're very, very heavy AWS and Azure because let's face it, they're the two most popular clouds, and we do have a limited time in the course. I'd love to bring GCP into it, but I just don't know where it would fit in. Workshop-wise, though, maybe. No guarantees, no promises, but quite the heavy schedule over the next few months. If someone else wants to do it, great. But I'll see what I can do. All right, I'll see what I can do from a GCP perspective, but no promises. All right. Anything else? Also like to see the assisted troubleshooting from other participants. That's awesome. All right. Okay, well, I think that's all. You can, like I said, you can reach out at any time. I'm going to pin this to the channel, my contact information, so you can find it more easily. But yeah, reach out at any time. So exercise 6 is really it. It's tearing down the resources, and then my thank you slide there. Get some more of my contact info. Yes, that emoji is there on purpose. Pro tip: if you want to keep folks from, or being able to have folks more or less say they're they don't really care to talk to you. They just want to talk to somebody. It's very marketing, very bot, feeling. Put an emoji in front of your first name. So if they say like, hey, emoji, I'm interested in blah, 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 it's very apparent that it's a bot or something like that. So that's why you see that on my LinkedIn. I forget where I heard that, but that's why it looks a bit odd. It's because I can be a bit odd at times. But let me go back one last time to the last exercise. If I can get this to work, there we go. Exercise 6. We're back to orange, which isn't a defend or an attacker thing. It's just a thing for the workshop. Tearing down the serverless app. You're going to tear down the resources in Cloud Shell, hopefully by just running the destroy.sh script. If that doesn't work, the next best thing, to be honest, is to just go in and delete the resources manually. There's not a ton of them. Delete the event bridge rule, delete the CloudTrail trail, empty and delete the S3 buckets, and delete the Lambda function. That's really it. That's all that we deployed throughout this workshop. And you can be back to not paying AWS anything. But as I said, if you leave this up and running, your bill is not going to be huge. It probably costs you less than 10 cents to do this workshop. All right. Okay, well, that's all I have. I have almost exactly 2 hours, so the time was definitely appropriate. Enjoy the teardown. I'll stick around for a few more minutes here in case you have issues with that teardown. I don't want to see you spending more money than you need to in your AWS account. So with that, though, I'm going to be signing off of Zoom. So hopefully you enjoyed it. I had a blast. Hopefully you did too. Don't be a stranger. Hope to see you in class someday. If not, hope to at least see you in that very next workshop on the 8th of June, July, excuse me, not the 11th. All right, see you then.
Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we hope to see you soon.